You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Omlor, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Omlor International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Today we have Samantha Kaaua, who is a speaker, author, and esteemed marriage coach, recognized for her counterculture approach to transforming relationships. Samantha recently launched her international best-selling book, Finding Beauty in Your Broken Pieces, The Art and Science of Transforming Any Relationship. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you, Jeanne. Thank you for having me here. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today.
Me too, because I know a little bit about what you do, and I want to really have you share your story with the listeners of how did you get to being this very, top relationship, marriage, coach? How did that all happen?
Yeah, I always tell people I think I was born into it. I come from a family of divorce. So my parents were divorced, my grandparents were divorced on both sides, many of my aunties and uncles as well. So divorce was really prevalent in my family. And I found myself at a really young age swearing that I would never get divorced when I got older. And it wasn't because it was a bad experience that my parents were separated. And they were apart before I was even one. So I have no recollection of them being together. And it wasn't a horrible experience. It was just something that I had longed for to be different for my children when I got older. And fast forward many, many years, and I got married to my high school sweetheart. We had our first daughter right out of high school. We did what we needed to do. I kept going to college. We got married, bought a house, had two more kids. I was in graduate school for marriage and family therapy. And on the morning of my comprehensive exam, I found out that my husband was hiding an addiction behind my back for the past 10 years. The 10 years we were together at that point. And I was devastated. It was literally that morning, I was about to sit for an 8-hour comprehensive exam. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a fraud. Oh my gosh, I don't, and I already had started working too, mind you, as a substance abuse counselor.
Oh,
It was just the perfect storm. He had just almost lost his foot in a work accident. I was diagnosed with a heart condition. My grandmother flatlined. We almost lost our matriarch.
mm-hmm.
Everything was crashing and burning. And that one thing I swore to myself as a little girl was about to come true. I was on the brink of divorce because how can you live with addiction in a relationship? And how can you live with someone lying to you for 10 years? And it was devastating. I was a pretty hot mess. It was bad. But over time, over the course of the next couple of years after that, I failed many, many times over, meaning like we tried marriage therapy and that didn't work. We tried different ways to work it out and we were still hitting dead ends. Until one day I made this commitment where I said, you know what, I'm not going to leave my marriage until I feel like a whole person. I don't want to go into the next relationship without resolving whatever is in me that was part of the creation of where we are today. And I was able to save our marriage. Like, I wouldn't say I saved our marriage. We both contributed to it, but I was the catalyst because he didn't want to do the work. And so, long story short, long story long, I believe that I was destined to do this work from the upbringing in my family to my own personal experiences in my own marriage, and then how I studied systems and families and relationships in college. So it all kind of funneled right perfectly to where we are today.
But what a story. And it does really seem like this is your calling, like that from a young age, I'm never going to get divorced. And then, of course, the challenges happen, of course, because
Yes.
that's how we learn and get better at what we teach people with, is because we have had the perfect storm. So that was a
Yes.
while ago. And then after that, you were the catalyst because your husband didn't want to do the work. Okay. And then was it fine from then? You just have been fine ever since?
Yeah, it was from the outside in, it looked like it just was going great and getting better and better and better and better until it wasn't again.
Mm.
And I would have called, so that happened about 7 years ago, roughly. And I would call that my dark night of the soul. That was a time where I was just questioning everything and really trying to figure out who I was. Well, fast forward to recent times today, about a year ago, now, my husband actually hit his dark night of the soul, and he began questioning everything. He wasn't happy. His depression came back, his addiction kind of rose up again in him, and he was starting to see things from a really dark place. And of course, me being his wife, I was the person to blame. So it got to a place where he said, I don't love you anymore. I don't want to be with you. I want more freedom. And he had a really skewed perception of how I was showing up in the relationship that really reflected a lot of what I used to be in our marriage many, many, many years ago. He just remembered that, and he perceived that I was still that person. And the amazing thing that happened and the opportunity that was laid in front of me was when I overcame my dark night of the soul and transformed our marriage the first time around. I did it haphazardly. I did it not knowing what I was doing. And I looked back and taught women and people how to transform their marriages by piecing together what I did, looking back in retrospect. But this time, because I was teaching it for so long, I got to do it in real time. I got to take my principles and apply it to my own marriage. And in a matter of months, so within 6 months actually, of doing what I recommend to my clients, which was showing up as in love for my husband. I knew he was in a dark place. I could tell this wasn't about me. This was what he was going through at that moment. And over, the past 7 years, he has held space for my transformation too. And it was just my turn. And so I teach my clients to hold the relationship with an open hand. It's not about like hanging on and staying married. It's about either we rise together, or, we rise as a couple, or the relationship or marriage might come to a completion. And I just held that openly. Maybe we're complete, but I don't want to end it in this negative, hateful, resentful way. So
Right.
I just held space and I did the work that I teach my clients to do. And in 6 months, we were actually back together. In 9 months, we moved back in together. And I got to show my clients in real time me modeling the system that I teach them. So it was really awesome.
That is just so completely aligned that you figured it out, kind of cobbled it together, right?
Yep.
Later on, you could test the system of what you cobbled together on yourself in real time, telling your clients, hey, I'm going through this. And it worked. And you had already moved out.
Yes.
You were living in separate homes.
Yes, he moved out almost immediately after he had that moment where he's like, I'm not in love with you anymore. I don't want to be with you. He I actually made him give our kids 2 weeks notice.
Okay.
I was like, you better, or I think it was a month, maybe, a month's notice of, so I didn't let him move out right
Right.
away. I said, let them know, let them transition. So he moved out almost immediately. And then, yeah, we were apart for, um, not living together for 9 months.
And then
Yes.
he decided he wanted to move back in.
We found another place to move in together
Together.
and start new
Good.
and find new energy.
Mhm.
But yes, he decided, he had an awakening moment
Yes.
and said, "Oh my gosh, what am I doing?
Mhm.
I love my family. I love my kids." The perception that he admitted that the perception that he had of me was really coming from this place of his addiction, where
Mm.
the enemy of the drug,
Mhm.
right? Or the addiction
Yes.
or whatever it is my enemy. So
Yes.
I was against him being unhealthy,
Yes.
and therefore I was the
Of
enemy.
course. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So he's amazing to have worked that all out. Most people wouldn't have. Okay. And obviously, your
he
system
is.
of you worked. So it's really about being the change. The cliche of being the change.
Yes.
You are really coaching people on being the change. So that is beautiful. I know you've helped a lot of couples not get divorced, and I like what you say about like saving your marriage without forcing your partner to change or getting a divorce, right?
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
is that what you say?
Yes.
Something like that?
Yeah. You don't necessarily need the marriage counseling because sometimes it doesn't work.
Mm,
You don't have to force them to change. You can actually ignite change in a
mm,
relationship. And the last thing is, yeah, many people think like divorce is the only option at a
mhm,
certain point so that you can keep growing and that you don't have to feel this pain and suffering anymore. And I like to share with people how to come to that natural completion
mhm.
and release the pain and suffering either before the divorce
Mhm.
or not even needing one.
Right, right.
Yes.
So that is extraordinary and certainly a different angle on it. And that's why I wanted to have you
Yes.
on the show because that's something different.
Yeah,
It's not about, hey, let's go into couples therapy and it's probably not going to work because most of the time it doesn't,
no,
right?
it doesn't.
And
It
then
actually
all
doesn't.
this blame and rehashing the past and all of that. You don't do that. So, what is one thing that you do? And I think probably forgiveness has a lot to do with this. What's one thing you work on? And I was intrigued because you don't usually work all the time with the whole couple. You're working with one person, right?
Yeah. So this won't be the tip, but just to preface why I only work with one person is, if you think of systems, for example, open systems, an ecosystem is something that most people are aware of, right? We
Mhm,
we live in an ecosystem. And if you change one part of that ecosystem, you can say an extinction of a species or an evolution of a species, by scientific law, by natural law, the system must and will change and adapt, or it will
mm,
come to a natural completion. The whole
mm,
ecosystem will end. And that's the same for a marriage. Two people in a relationship is a system. And so
mhm,
if you, as the change agent, create change in a way that impacts the system, it must and will change. And
mhm,
if not, you will know it's complete. And it's this calm,
mm,
confident energy of completion. And so that's
mm,
why working with one partner is so powerful, because half the time the other partner doesn't want to do the work, or they're not ready,
mhm,
or they're in denial, or. So I
mm,
like to work with the person who sees that there's something that needs to change. And
right.
in that, we do the work. As I always say, like, personal development doesn't help your relationships, because there's this subtle nuance that you need to know to apply it to the relationships in your life. If
Mhm,
you have a certain mindset with that comes most of the time with personal development, it will feel like you're growing apart from many of your relationships. But if you
mm,
apply it correctly, your relationships can actually evolve with you. Um, I know you and I had a conversation a little offline, saying,
mhm,
when you made it and you did well in your business, that your relationships came with you and nothing really
mhm,
changed. And that's because you probably intuitively knew how to apply your personal growth to your relationships.
mm,
Yeah.
interesting, because I did leave you that message, and so you saw it that way because I remember you were saying that you also help people with relationships with other people. And I said,
Yes.
that's true, because when things change, you know how people change and other people don't accept that change. Like if somebody were addicted to something and all of a sudden they're not, believe it or not, people around them don't know how to handle that because they're used to saying, well, that's that
Yes.
drunk, right? So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had done that. It just, I had no issues because people were just like, great, that's wonderful. This is great. But you're correct that, when people change, it's not like everybody's happy. It's they don't know
Hmm.
what to do with that change, and not because they're bad people. They're just used
Yes.
to something, right? So
Yes.
yeah. So you're also helping people with their whole life, the changes, and not just the relationships.
Yeah, well, I also love to say one of my main teaching tenets, and this is in my book as well, is that everything is a relationship. You relate to
Mm-hmm.
everything in your world, even the inanimate objects, the computer that we're staring at, right? The screens, we relate to it. We have a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with the environment, with time, with money, with energy, all of the above.
Right.
So if we, as a systemic person, someone that comes from relationship background, I love to teach people that if you can transform one relationship in your life, you actually have access to transform every relationship in your life,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're struggling with money, with your health, with anything and your time management, stress, like,
Mm-hmm.
and you have relationships within yourself as well. So
Mm-hmm.
those are, I mean, I know these are not tips per se, but I think the
Mm-hmm.
biggest gift that I could ever give any of my clients or anyone I'm speaking to is a change in perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
A shift in the
Absolutely.
mindset that you have
Yes.
about relationships.
Yes. And it's so funny what you say, and nobody's really said it that way before to me. It's true that people are into self development, and it's great. But the times that I've heard are many where somebody has said to me, I wanted to self develop. So I started doing Tony Robbins work or XYZ or whatever, right?
Hmm.
And it actually caused a divorce
Yes,
because the spouse
so much.
was not
Yes,
used to that change and wasn't on board with it. And so what you're saying is that person didn't know how to integrate that change into their relationship. And it
yes.
wasn't the spouse's fault. It was the
No,
spouse was like, what is going on here? This is not the
yeah,
person I knew. And and then the person making the change for the better is, but why don't they want me to change? I'm better now. So that is something I've heard many times, that I
yes,
started self-developing and it created all these problems in my marriage, and we ended up getting divorced, or my wife almost divorced me, or my husband, and they
yep.
weren't on board. So what's the tip that if people do want to develop? Because I feel like a lot of couples hold, partners in couples hold themselves back subconsciously or consciously, because they know their spouse won't like it if they change for the better even. So
Hmm.
what's a tip to get people to have that work when they're doing self-development?
Oh, there's so many. I could go in so many different directions right now. The one tip that I would give to anyone is your partner is a perfect reflection of your subconscious beliefs. If you deep down subconsciously believe that your personal growth will separate you from your partner, it will happen.
Mm,
So, if that's what's going on for you as you endeavor into your own personal development, you feel the separation of your relationship, I would check in with your beliefs if that's
mm,
something that has been ingrained in you. And
mm-hmm,
the best thing you can do for the relationship, there's nothing that you actually need to do externally. Maybe some
mm-hmm,
gratitude practice would be great. But
mm-hmm,
aside from that, is simply check your own beliefs and change them.
mm,
Like, oh my gosh, I do believe that this is going to separate us. I do believe that
mm-hmm,
he's not going to like that I changed. I do believe that he's going to get scared that I'm going to leave him. Right. And so
mm,
if you go back and do your own work and
mm,
transform that belief and say, no, this personal growth in me is going to help my spouse too. They're going to
mm,
love me. They're going to admire me. They're going to appreciate my growth for the relationship, and just instill
mm.
that new belief and watch the
Okay.
magic happen. Just watch
Yes.
it
Okay.
happen.
I'm getting it now. So somewhere along the line, they're thinking, oh, they're not going to be happy for me that I'm found this new
Nope.
thing. That's what it is. So that's so interesting because you just made me realize now that I never had a belief that my friends or family would not be happy if I succeeded because I knew that they would want me to succeed. It was never even a thought.
Yep.
So that was why when I became very successful, that's great. That's great. You're doing so well because I never thought they wouldn't be happy. Of course they're going to be happy.
You
They
believed
just want
it.
me to
Yeah.
do well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's so interesting.
Yes, and that, like you said, it applies to all relationships. So
Mm,
it's really important that we check our beliefs because our partners will always reflect back to us. You hear it often, like, "Oh, your partner's a reflection of you." It's not
hmm
literal. It's not like,
hmm
"Oh, he's an addict, I'm an addict."
No.
I mean, it can be, but it's not
hmm
literal. It's the beliefs that they're reflecting back. So
Right.
that's the gift. I
Mm,
always say stay in the relationship so that you can receive all the gifts you are meant to receive from this person, which is
hmm
a reflection of all the beliefs that you have an opportunity to transform.
hmm
And once those are complete, the relationship will get better. And here's one thing that most people don't know is that
hmm
when you work on yourself in the relationship, things will look worse before it gets better. Most people end the marriage while it looks worse and they don't
mm,
wait for it to get better. That's what I found.
mm. Right. And that's a common thing that you start a process and it's always going to get worse. And you got to keep going because it's sort of like with certain sicknesses. You know how certain sicknesses
Yeah.
actually get a little worse before they get better when they're doing certain treatments?
Yes.
It's
Exactly
kind
like
of
that.
like that.
You're
Right.
breaking everything down to build it back up.
It's the deconstruction period for the
Yes.
reconstruction. Yes. So you're saying
Exactly.
there'll be a deconstruction. It's going to be a hot mess.
Yep.
That's not when you end it. You wait
No.
until you try to reconstruct it and see how it goes. And if it's still not great, well, then something has to happen, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
one more thing, I know I could go on for hours, but just one more thing. I just posted something the other day. It was hashtag remain unaltered, meaning
Mm,
when you change and you start to transform yourself, your partner will become more symptomatic because they're trying to get you back to equilibrium. They're trying to get you back to
mm,
the status quo, not on
mhm,
purpose, but just
mhm,
subconsciously. And if you can remain unaltered and not bite the bait to come back
mhm,
to the old patterns,
mm,
that's when transformation happens. So if you want to boil water, you can't keep turning on and off the stove and expect
mm,
the water to boil for the phase change to happen. You have to keep the heat on, which is remaining unaltered by their behavior, and
mhm,
then the phase change, the water will boil. That's when things
mm.
transform.
So it's standing your ground.
Yeah, in a healthy,
Yeah.
loving, compassionate
Mhm.
way. Absolutely.
Standing your ground that this is what I'm doing and I'm not going to be that little boat on the raging ocean waves. I'm going to anchor
Yes. Yes,
and move a
and
little
not
bit.
doing it
Yeah.
with anger or resentment, which often
Right.
happens. You're doing it
Mhm.
with love. Mhm.
Right, right. So that was so interesting that you said that I was going to show up in love with my husband.
Yeah.
So basically it's about like not letting get resentment or anger or any of that. It's like, no, I'm just going to show up no matter what with love for my spouse. And that was a big part of what helped you two to get back together. Is that correct?
Yeah, it didn't, the caveat here is it didn't mean not setting healthy boundaries. There were many
Mhm.
healthy boundaries,
Mm.
firm boundaries, especially him being back in his addiction that I had to create
Mhm.
to keep my children safe. So boundaries were
Mhm.
set, but it was set with
Mhm.
love and not with hate and
Yes.
anger. And that is a really subtle but important nuance that most people aren't able to understand right away because it's like you take it personal and he's like he's doing this to us when really
Mm.
he's doing it to himself. And yeah,
Mhm.
we are getting the bad end of it, but at the same time it's
Mm.
really not meant to hurt us. So holding
Right.
healthy boundaries, holding the structure of safety,
Mhm.
and then just letting him do his thing with love.
Right. And that's so true that loving somebody does not mean being walked all over. It's
No.
not that's
No.
yeah, that's not what you're talking about because that's not love. That's just being a doormat. So that's true love is having the boundaries, because that's
Yes.
what helps other people, is healthy boundaries, because
Yeah.
they respect that, and that's what strengthens. So, wow. And so, well, thank you for sharing all this. So, is there anything that you would like to um, share with everybody before we finish this segment?
Yes, there's one more thing that I often teach people when I'm helping them transform their relationship, and it's that all healthy relationships are actually based in a foundation of self love and self
Mm,
trust. So it's not about trusting your partner, it's actually about trusting yourself. So if there's
mm,
any mistrust in any relationship you're in, go back to you and find the parts of yourself that you're lacking in trust. So every relationship, healthy relationship, is based on a foundation of self trust. So that's
mm.
one more thing to ponder and chew on.
Right, very, very deep work here. So, Samantha, of course, we're going to have all the show notes with where the people can reach you. But for people that are driving or listening, what's your site that they can go to find out more about you?
Yeah, they can visit my website. It is www.thegems, and that's TheGems.com, thegems.com, and it stands for the gift of each meaningful moment shared.
Oh, and also it's about teaching people to be complete gems, so a
Yeah.
diamond in their relationships. Okay, Samantha, thank you so much for turning up today. And thank you, people who are listening, for tuning in. And we will see you on the next one. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Omlor, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Omlor International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.